Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Logan. I think for a long time everyone's wanted a really good Wolverine movie, and specifically a very violent Wolverine movie. The thing that we've always been hinted at through the various films that Hugh Jackman has starred in as Wolverine, we always get the idea of Wolverine Berserker Rage, but we don't see it to the violence that I think we've always wanted. And Logan finally answers that question. It also does something that frees it from the X-Men franchise, which has kind of been the longest running of the current superhero kind of cinematic universes that have been going on, is it's not too beholden to its plot necessarily. In fact, the plot isn't really what's most important to this movie. What's most important to this film is Logan as a character and Wolverine as a character, as well as X-23 and Professor X and their journey itself, but not exactly what they're doing on that journey. There is still kind of a typical kind of superhero plot kind of thing, and this is kind of the reverse of, let's say, the Wolverine, the last Wolverine movie, where that has kind of more of a general superhero plot, and that's mainly what it's about. This is kind of a character study of Wolverine, and this film works a lot better because of it. It's a lot darker, it's a lot drearier, it's very nihilistic. It doesn't make the world look like a happy place at all. It has a very bleak worldview, almost a very 70s kind of worldview, although this film also to me feels kind of like a 90s action movie that was influenced by 70s action movies, but that's like a whole thing. Logan gives you a darker, grittier superhero movie that's actually good at a time where most people are absolutely sick of them, but gives you honestly a better reason for it that works both theoretically for this franchise and also for this character, and gives you a better setup, this being far away in the future and the crazy continuity that is these X-Men films that I don't think makes any sense. Mixes film noir and western and the road movie and the superhero movie to give you an interesting kind of almost natural kind of postmodern mashup that we used to have before postmodern mashups were so pronounced, kind of in the beginning of blockbuster kind of postmodern mashup, and the movie itself wasn't pointing it out to you in such a glaring way. Logan is the darker, sadder, grimmer film that is also playing in the multiplex and for large audiences. It's kind of like a walking contradiction, but it actually really works. It's probably the only X-Men film that I would describe as risky, really, and kind of takes advice from the Marvel Studios films, much like Deadpool did, whereas Deadpool does character first in the funny, quippy, kind of fun way. Logan does it in kind of a darker, kind of almost character study, nihilistic way that you didn't think anyone would take these kind of films. James Mangold and Hugh Jackman end up kind of making a perfect kind of farewell love letter to Wolverine, as he feels like the character has grown out of favor in this world and the world has moved on without him, and this film kind of makes you feel like it's time for Hugh Jackman and Wolverine to go away for a while, as everything in this world has changed around them and changed in ways that it doesn't feel like they're a part of this world anymore. Even though this film feels like the kind of darker superhero movie, it almost feels like the farewell to the darker superhero movie, because it pushes it in ways that isn't about attitude. It shows you a character who's gone through various things, and we've seen them gone through those various things using continuity in ways that various superhero movies have done before, but using that continuity to show older age. This is using it for character and mood and setting in ways that I think most superhero dark and gritty films don't really have the artistry or the balls to really pull off as well as Logan does. In the not too distant future of 2029, Logan, who has greatly aged and his healing factor is beginning to falter, is a chauffeur in kind of like sort of an Uber driver in the future, driving around kind of saving up money to get a boat so he can spend his remaining days on the sea with Professor X, who is now in his 90s, who is hiding out with Wolverine on a farm in Mexico, and Caliban, played by Stephen Merchant. Eventually he finds out about a daughter he has who is cloned from his DNA, but that's still his daughter, X-23, and this woman is trying to connect him and X-23 together to hopefully get him to help her and X-23, but then that woman is murdered, and Wolverine decides to then go off and help X-23 and go on a road trip with her, Professor X, and himself, as the government is coming after him, with a character played by Boyd Holbrook playing the Reavers in kind of a Fall of the Mutants kind of idea, sort of. So they have to kind of get away from the government, as the government wants to try to get her back, and Logan and Professor X know they cannot have her back, and they will just use her as an asset as they try to hopefully free her and get her across the border to Canada before the government can snatch her up. Logan has a real older film Hollywood sense to it, and very much in that film noir way, that film noir was very much post-World War II, and this feeling that veterans felt that the country had changed since they had been there, and changed around them, and changed in ways they didn't necessarily agree with. And that's going all throughout Logan. Logan is very grim, nihilistic, almost in a 70s way, so I guess I understand the 70s thing, way about it. And it has that film noir sense, almost more in the lighting and the attitude about it, really. It's mainly and primarily a Western, and a Western kind of a road picture. And it does kind of have that last gunslinger thing about it. It references the movie Shane like a lot, very obviously, in fact, but it kind of really works for it. The kind of mood and the flow of this film very much feels like a 90s film, kind of almost like Terminator 2, where although you have big action set pieces throughout it, which are very memorable, there's a whole hour section of Terminator 2, which is just them driving and character development, which feels very much like an old Western. It makes you feel like you're kind of going through more, because it feels like you're on an epic journey, which this film does feel like an epic, but you wouldn't think of Terminator 2 as an epic like Gone with the Wind or something. And Logan kind of reminds me of that, or even Point Break from Catherine Bigelow, where when you look at the runtime, you're like, it's that long, and you think of it more of just in its silly kind of action constructs. And I think Logan probably will be remembered for like its violence, for him like getting his claws, like ripping people's heads off and things like that, and actually seeing the violence of it. And I think it'll be remembered for that. When you watch it, you'll be overcome. And as I was, it kind of like super bums you out in ways that you didn't think a gritty superhero movie could do. You know, people will spout off about those things, but this is like dark and grim, and the fear of the world that we're living in and how you don't agree with it is pretty sad, and how you almost don't fit in with this world anymore. Very much plays within that film noir. Also kind of the end of the West kind of thing. In Westerns, it would be, oh, they're building the railroad, so everything's going to fall apart. In Logan, it's just like, there's no one here anymore, and I'm dying. I find it interesting the way they use violence in this, and all the X-Men films have been PG-13, and oftentimes when you see Wolverine like go berserker rage on people, you don't actually see blood. There's no actual consequences for that violence. And in this, there's lots of blood, and it feels like consequences for violence lean very heavily on this film. And I think it actually really works for this movie in ways that other gritty superhero movies don't, since we have sat through 17 years of X-Men movies, and we see this older guy, and he's weary of the world and weary of what he's done. Having us actually in this film being able to experience violence versus the other films, even though we've seen him go on all these adventures, makes this one feel sadder, makes it feel like almost like, maybe in a way you could say, the perception of him doing violence has changed with his age. Like, he understands how it means more. I don't think every film is from Wolverine's perspective, but the idea of that suddenly now that you're older, you understand the stakes of that violence, kind of holds very true to this film. And I think that's probably why Logan feels so different, because his view of the world has changed, and theoretically I think makes the violence of this film work a lot better. James Mangold, this might be one of his better films he's ever made. It speaks a lot for him being a journeyman director. Obviously he's directed 2 Wolverine movies in a row. What this film shows me from his last Wolverine film is that he is very beholden to being a studio director, and he is good at it. He's done other films like Walk the Line, Copland, Kate and Leopold. This is his 3rd movie with Hugh Jackman. I notice he can't let go of the superhero plot, and there's particular like various like big bad villain thing that they don't talk about in the trailers, and I won't talk about, and you'll know what it is. And he uses an obvious Western trope in it, where Logan is wearing a white tank top, this villain is wearing a black tank top, and they show you clips in Shane earlier, so you should be able to figure out what he's doing there. I wish that hadn't been in there. I wish he had just had the Boyd Holbrook character and the Richard E. Grant character coming after them, and not had that extra thing. But it felt like almost like James Mangold, or maybe 20th Century Fox, and Lauren Scholler Donner, who's produced all these X-Men films, insisted that being in there. But since most of this film isn't necessarily about that the way the Wolverine is, I think it works a lot better. James Mangold also, I don't think, is the greatest at doing action sequences. He's not a great special effects action director. I think he's actually much better at the acting, which is probably the thing that this film is most concerned with. So maybe he did it in a meta way, or he's just not great at directing action sequences. A lot of them are done in more of a traditional sense for a blockbuster nowadays. I think what I like about this is the studio director from, this kind of Hollywood made a film in this way, a darker kind of nihilistic kind of character study road movie. And I think James Mangold almost made probably one of the more riskier studio films, but in a studio director type of way, which is pretty remarkable. You don't think of journeyman studio directors making things like this. This is considered, I guess, if we're going off auteur theory and stuff, this is considered probably more of an auteurish type of film, and I don't think he directs it with that kind of a big personality, but obviously you can tell he directed it. And a lot of people brought up how he always has kind of a Western influence on his films, and that's very prevalent in this. But the way he does action sequences, I'm not a fan of. I kept wondering, it's like I would see the gore and the blood, but it wasn't staged excellently, except for the one sequence in Vegas. That sequence was just absolutely great. But it's same with the Wolverine. It's that bullet train sequence was so cool. In terms of just seeing it for action, I know the audience I saw with loved the action, but it seemed to me just the character and everyone playing off each other, to me, was so much more important and worked so much better. Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are two really well-trained actors, and both theater actors. It's kind of interesting. You could have them probably in a classic Hollywood film and they would work just as well. And this feels like kind of almost something like Atlantic City or something with Burt Lancaster, where you have an older Hollywood actor in a 70s film, and the weariness kind of works for it because you're aware of how they've aged and you're aware of how long it's been. And this film does play off that, particularly when they bring up the Statue of Liberty thing. I noticed they don't overload it with references, which I wouldn't mind an X2 reference, and maybe don't bring up Last Stand, but regardless of that, I thought that was cute because it does highlight hey, that was the beginning, look where we are now. Hugh Jackman is probably his best performance as Wolverine. He's done a lot of fairly good performances as Wolverine, but I think this works the best. Obviously his acting and his character is more an highlight of this. Most of the films that Wolverine has been in, it's usually Wolverine and the X-Men, so it's not like he hasn't had the spotlight this whole time or anything. He handles it probably better, and I like him as an old man. I'm excited to see him play more old man roles. I feel like that's where he's really going to come into his own, with his glasses and his beard. He's really amazing at that. Patrick Stewart finally gets to have some fun with Professor X, and he's really, really funny and really, really good. And probably his best performance is Professor X as well, because he actually gets to work on that performance and build it. He's not just playing the archetypes that they're supposed to play in it. It's they get to really embody these things, and it's almost like they went, well, I've done that before, so you don't really need to see that again. And it frees up the X-Men films in ways that I don't think, this is the first X-Men film that felt free. If you notice, people keep saying this isn't just a good superhero movie, it's a good movie. When the superhero genre works at its best is when it's doing another genre on top of that. And since Logan does a couple genres and is more concerned with being a movie, kind of a Western and film noir and this road thing, than being a superhero movie, I think that's why it works so successfully, because superhero movies work better in genre than within the superhero genre. Within the superhero genre, it gets sort of boring, it's not as exciting anymore. We've seen that so many times. To really get this genre to work at this point, you need to infuse other genres within it, and then it feels exciting. That's probably the only way we get genre picks anymore, is have them be mashup with superheroes and whatnot. This is actually the first time I've liked Boyd Holbrook, who was kind of just the white guy in Narcos to me. I never liked him on Narcos. I really liked him in this as one of the Reavers. This kind of makes me understand why people are casting him in so many big movies. I was not getting it. Now I'm okay, I sort of get it in this. Richard E. Grant's fine. A lot of people have commented he doesn't go as crazy villain as everyone thinks he could, and I agree with that. I did like Stephen Merchant as Caliban, which is a little weird since the last X-Men movie also had a Caliban played by a different actor, completely different era, and I don't think these two are connected. I prefer Stephen Merchant, and I thought he did a good job, and he's not someone I thought of to do. When I heard he was Caliban, I was like, that's odd, and it actually really works. And I think the big star of this is Delphine Keane, I think, who played X-23, who's very, very good, probably one of the better kid actors in a while. I know she plays the kind of silent girl killer thing or whatever, but she's actually very good at it. It's hard to kind of do a silent kind of performance like that, and I know, particularly people think of Eleven and Stranger Things and such, but she does a fairly good job, especially playing off of Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman, who are two very well trained actors, and you can tell that she has a real presence about herself, that she can distinguish herself among two real great veterans and very well trained actors as well. The best thing about Logan is it's primarily about character, and it's primarily about Logan. It's called Logan, And that's what's most important to it, really. It's not about setting up this thing or his origin or anything like that. It's just giving you a good story, kind of samurai-esque almost story, and in a way that works better than the movie where he's in Japan, oddly enough. It gives this kind of finite thing about it. It feels like the last time as a gunslinger in a world that's kind of forgotten them. And, you know, even though he's the best at what he does, and what he does isn't very good, it's sad to see Hugh Jackman go. It's sad to see this interpretation of Wolverine go, but I think it was a splendid way to do it. And probably one of the more riskier and interesting big blockbuster films I've seen in a while, and one that I would actually like to see again. It was weird seeing it with an audience because people were like, had their kids there, and just a little too boisterous of an audience. I feel like I would really like to watch this with like a glass of whiskey late at night. I think that would probably maybe be the best time to watch Logan. Hugh Jackman did a really great job with Logan, and kind of freed up the X-Men films in a way, but also ended up making kind of like an action film from the 90s where it's about doing this epic journey where you feel like you've gone through a major thing, even though, you know, you're just sitting around watching a movie and stuff, but you feel like you've gone through something. You feel like you've gone through an experience. And as epic as all the X-Men films have been, none of them felt the way Logan does in that way. Could this be the best X-Men film? It's definitely higher on my list. It's definitely the best Wolverine film. But again, I said that with the second one too. So, you know, each of them get progressively better, but this is such a huge leap. This does the more violence thing in a superficial way, and does have, you know, curse words and things, but also goes into more adult themes. It gets into mortality. It gets into the idea of violence. It gets into cost. It gets into feeling alienated from the world that you felt that you were going to have a better future from. It's all of that, and I think Logan does that so well. It aspires to be kind of a great superhero movie, but in ways it tries to do it in trying to just be a great journey action kind of epic, and pulls it off probably better. I think it's probably best when it just worries about being that unique kind of different movie, and it almost like doesn't even care about doing the superhero plot, almost kind of like forgets about it and moves in its own way, which I think is kind of really incredibly refreshing about Logan, that it almost like breaks from the superhero structure and does its own thing. And I think that says a lot about James Mangold as a director, and this shows a real interesting development as a studio filmmaker, as he both does what the studio clearly wants and also does his own thing in a fantastic way. I think this kind of a film a lot of audiences wouldn't see if Logan wasn't attached to it, and I think that's probably one of the cooler things. It's not as interested in fulfilling your Wolverine quota. It just wants to be a fantastic Wolverine movie, and wants to be that fantastic, sad, like we need to get the cattle over the river kind of a movie, but also ends up sort of saying things about immigration, like a great X-Men story does. Ends up saying things about Logan himself and how he's lived and how he's behaved, and now he has to grow up at the end and figure out what to do with his daughter. It's moving, it's sad, it doesn't make you feel great when you leave the theater, but it's an overall great epic mutant experience. I think the best thing I can say about it is it breaks from the tradition and does something truly great, and uses the actors first to make a really compelling, interesting drama, and forgets about the drama of a various superhero thing, just focusing on the actors to make that the dark and gritty element, while also having a lot of violence to say something more about that as well. Logan, I think, gets it all to kind of wrap around and work perfectly within an interesting, beautiful package of a superhero film that very few superhero films would ever think of doing, and probably were too afraid to even try. Logan doesn't seem to care about that. This is their senioritis, so if they're going to have senioritis, they might as well leave us with a violent, troubling motion picture to make us kind of second guess trying to do this again. It might be a farewell to dark and gritty superhero movies, as it does feel like time is changing away from them, and it's also a fine farewell to probably one of the greater portrayals of a superhero we've had in cinema history. And it's all a nice goodbye that we can all sit back and walk away in the sunset with, and be happy that we got what we got with Wolverine. So if you have seen Logan and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.